Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. We've made it through another week, and I'm excited to get this long weekend started. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Henry and Gal and Katya and Basmala. I apologize if I mispronounce your name. And Josh and Gakko and Umacorn and Anita and Sarah, Cody. Great to see all of you. If I missed anyone, I do apologize. If you are tuning in on Twitter, I can't see chat over there, but if you do want to chat along, head on over to behance.net/Adobe Live so I can see all of your amazing faces. All right, so we are here for Masterclass number 54. We've been at this for 54 weeks. So let's go ahead and hop over to my screen. Hey, Jeffrey. Hey, Val, Gareth, Fabian, Yanko, I apologize, Lee, and Tim. We've got everybody in the house today. All right, so here I am on Dribbble, and the reason I'm here, not just to get more followers, follow me on Dribbble, but if I head down here, I've been working on some landing pages for a travel experience, and I posted this on all my platforms not too long ago, and I asked all of you which one you thought that stood out the most. And there was this one. I'd love to hear in the chat. So this is number 1, this is number 2, and we've got number 3. So let me know in the chat. Most people, I'm gonna save which one most people voted for on the other social platforms until all of you start voting. I'm curious to see if it kind of lines up. It was a mix on Instagram. I think Twitter was more or less leaning towards one of them. So again, 1, and then 2, and then 3. I know there's a bit of a delay, so it's gonna catch up at some point, but we're gonna go ahead and create this today, at least one of them, and maybe we can just throw in some images to create the others. There's a little bit of a difference between some of them. Some of the navigation items at the top are in different locations. 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Wow. Okay. We got 1 for 3. 0 for 1. I like 1 myself. Not the most, but I like 1 because it's so minimalistic. Oh, there's a 1. Thank you, Laura. 2. So it definitely seems like number 2. I think it's a lot of that neon vibe that is present in the image behind it. Otherwise, the majority of the landing page is identical, but the image is slightly different, right? Of course, you can create an image carousel and something like that. Val, you can make a poll. You don't have to. It's more of an unofficial thing. I didn't know you can make polls here. That's fancy. I mean, if you want to, you can definitely make a poll, but it looks like number 2 is the clear winner. So we will go with that image. All right, let's go ahead and hop over to Adobe XD. And if you've never joined these masterclasses before, these go a little bit more in depth into XD, but I definitely talk about a lot of the basics and I try to explain exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing. But if you are new to XD, we have a great Learn Hub that full of content from myself and Matt Ray and Danny Beaumont and a lot of different people. And we have, of course, the Daily Creative Challenge, which is currently being run by Jesse Showalter. All right, so here we are in XD, and we are going to start with a web preset. Now, there's a few different web presets, 1920 by 1080, 1366, 1280, completely up to you and your developers. If you are working with a team, talk with them, see which one they prefer. But for the most part, you'll still be able to export all the assets and adapt it for various sizes, or you can choose a custom size over here to the right. All right, we're gonna go for 1920 by 1080 to start nice and large. And if anyone has questions as I am going through this process, I'm taking a peek at the chat from time to time. Let me know. And where can I learn the basics? So it's a good question. Again, Daily Creative Challenge is a good place. Our Learn Hub, hopefully someone can put a link in the chat. Danny Beaumont has a wonderful series on getting started in XD. I also have some great tutorials on YouTube. I just uploaded a tutorial on how to create this in like 2 minutes. It's amazing, using background blurs, textures, and blending modes. So if you want to learn how to do that, youtube.com/Howard Pinsky. Or there's a link on Dribbble as well. It's a pretty fun effect. All right. So here we go. We are going to get going, and I'm going to name my artboard Japan, and let's begin. So the obvious first step in this particular landing page is to add in that image that all of you, or most of you, voted for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the good old rectangle tool and draw one out. Now, if you're new to XD, like some of you in the chat are, you might be wondering why I'm dragging out a rectangle for this image, right? Why can't I just grab the image from Finder and drag it into Adobe XD? And you certainly can, right? But because I'm using very large images, these are all from Adobe stock, so they're, in some cases they're 6,000 pixels wide. They're very large images. Let me go ahead and find this image here, right? Beautiful image. If I were to drag it directly into XD, let me hide this shape for a second. You're gonna notice it's a large image, right? So of course you can go ahead and shrink that down and kind of finesse it into place like that, right? Or if you add in a shape, and any shape in Adobe XD can be used as a mask. So a rectangle, an ellipse, polygon, a custom shape that you create with the pen tool. Hey, Brett, great to see you. Hey, Leslie, and everyone else. Cara, thanks for the kind words on the glass car. That was a fun, it was a fun project that I worked on. And fun fact, I posted this on Twitter, is this was a very last minute design. I already uploaded the video as unlisted on YouTube, a different design, and I post on Twitter. It was fine, it kind of got the job done, but then it came to me, what if I added texture, like a rainy texture? And it was like 6 o'clock at night, and I worked all through the night, and I got the new video up, and it was, I think it turned out a lot better. All right, so we've got our shape, right? And going back to what I was talking about is now if you grab this same very large image and drag it into XD, you're gonna notice that shape is being highlighted and boop, and now it masks it. So it resizes it to fit that shape, and it also masks out anything that is outside of the shape. And I can double click on this to adjust it if I need to. But it looks pretty good. We've got a nice focal point in this particular image and these beautiful lights, and I think things are looking pretty good. So we've got our image in place. Now we're gonna get to this bottom section in a moment, but just to set that up for a little bit later, I'm going to select this artboard. You can do that by clicking on the artboard title at the top left, or just by double clicking on an empty space on the artboard. Hey everyone who's just joining, great to see all of you. And I'm going to set the color. We're going to stick with a very light color, but I'm going to add a touch of blue, just a tiny bit of blue. And I'm doing that because we have a lot of blues and purples and these nice cooling colors in this image at the top. And I just want that section at the bottom to bounce off of that. And certainly the white will do the job, but if you take a look at the difference, right? It's such a subtle difference. There's the white and then there's the blue. It's so subtle, but it can make a massive difference when you're working on these projects, not just for the people viewing it, but for yourself as well. It makes you feel good, right? To make these very slight color changes. Beautiful. All right. So now going top to bottom on this particular landing page, we might want to start off with our navigation at the top. Happy Friday. I agree. Happy Friday. And if you are in the US and have a long weekend, I hope you all have a great long weekend. So what we want to do now is start adding in some text. And I'm going to just grab my text tool, shortcut key T, and let's say hot deals. And again, this is a travel landing page. So they have things like deals and destinations, packages, and things like that, right? Now, for the properties of this text layer, let's go for 24. And we're going to start off, let's try Museo. It's a kind of fun typeface, right? There we go. That looks pretty good. Sir Pinsky in the house. Great to see you. Mensa. Great to see some familiar faces and new faces as well. Now, what I'm going to do here is we're going to play around with the weight a little bit, right? If I zoom in, we can see our text layer. And 24 looks okay for the size, at least for now. We can always change that later. 700, no, of course, every typeface is going to have different weights to it. Some will say bold and semi-bold, heavy, black. This one in particular goes by numbers, which correlates to the web as well. You would typically use things like 100, 300, 700 when you're adding in CSS and things like that. So we'll stick with this and we'll see what that looks like. Let me zoom out a little bit. Now, if we're talking about navigation links at the top, And Fabian is saying, it recently learned that I cannot drag and drop images directly into XD. That's interesting. Is it a Windows limitation? It shouldn't be. I know certain images cannot be. Things like SVGs cannot be dragged in bulk into XD, but for the most part, I don't believe Windows has a limitation like that. Yeah, someone's mentioning they don't have a problem with Windows doing that as well. Make sure XD is up to date, restart your computer, make sure Windows is up to date as well. There's a few different things. And also, if that doesn't work, Adobe Care on Twitter is a great resource, and they can definitely help you out, because it could just be a certain type of image you're trying to drag in, or a bug. Who knows? All right, so we have our first navigation, and there are a few ways to get additional navigation links across your document, right? Of course, many of you might be reaching for the good old repeat grid at the top, and that can certainly work, right? I can drag out a few additional like this, right? I can space them out, and I can dive in and let's say packages, and maybe I can center this, and this one could be destinations. But you might be noticing what's going on here, right? Is that even though we have our spacing of our repeat grid set, it's set, right? It's set in stone, and it doesn't move things around. So if you have all your text layers are the exact same size, it'll work perfectly. But if they're all different sized, then you're going to get some weird spacing issues, and it just looks a little bit off. It'll also be very difficult to add in additional items aside from text layers, right? If you want to add a logo in the middle of this, won't be very easy. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to undo this before I made the repeat grid. And someone's asking, where did I get the image? I got this image and all the other images that I use from Adobe stock. And I typically do, you can get images from Unsplash or a lot of different places, but I do that just to avoid licensing issues and copyright issues. I know images, I can use them in my videos and my live streams, and there won't be any problems. All right, so what we're gonna do instead is we're going to be using a stack to make this happen, and you'll see why there are benefits to that in a moment. So I do have this one link or this one text layer selected, and I'm going to pop this text layer into a group. So Command and Control G, you can also do that in your layers panel, right click and group, and I'm going to name this navigation. Now, once that's done, inside of the properties inspector, we can go ahead and turn on a stack, just like this. And it's going to automatically determine the orientation of that stack based on the layers inside of it. Now, we only have one layer, so it could technically go in either direction, horizontal or vertical, but it defaults to horizontal if there's one layer. If there are multiple, it would determine that it could be vertical or horizontal. So we've got a stack enabled, and now I can dive in here, select this text layer and duplicate, Command and Control D, and I can do it again and again if I wanted to, right? So I have 4 text layers, and this is very similar to a repeat grid. And now what you can do, you can also determine and add in the spacing. So you can do that either inside of the properties inspector right here. So let's say I wanted maybe, 24 pixels. That's a little bit squishy, but you can certainly do that. Or you can dive in and hold down your shift key to adjust them all at once, just like that. Or you can let go of shift and just adjust spacing individually. But what's really nice about this is going back to what we were talking about earlier about changing the text layers, is if I start typing, let's say, packages, you're noticing the text layers on the right-hand side are automatically adjusting. Did you know when you view a prototype on iPad XD, it doesn't embed the font? So, Kara, there's a few things about that. So, one, fonts are not embedded because of licensing issues, especially with third-party fonts. But if you do download the Creative Cloud app on your iPad, I believe that's the app, you can actually sync your Creative Cloud fonts to your iPad. So, and if they're present there, then you'll be able to view your prototypes as you would. But because of licensing and things like that, of course, if you really needed to, and it was a third-party font, then you can convert that into a path, for example, and that should solve that because it won't need the font anymore. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and destinations, and finally over here to the right, maybe reviews. And again, those text layers, unlike the repeat grid, automatically moved over as we were making those changes. And another benefit to stacks is if I decided maybe I wanted packages at the front instead of hot deals, view, just like that, or view, right? I can move 2 of them at once, 1 of them at once. I can adjust the spacing if I need to. It's pretty cool. All right, another benefit of stacks is when we were talking about the repeat grid, we were not, how do you convert a path, how do you convert to a path in XD? So it's under the object menu and then path and then convert to path or command or control 8. You can do that as well. All right, in the repeat grid, if we were to put another object in there, it would add it to all the different cells. But now what we can do is we can grab, let's say, our ellipse tool and we can drag out an ellipse. And you're gonna notice it's placing it right beside. And I can adjust the padding. Let's say I wanted to keep the, what did I have for the overall? 68, it's a very random number, but I can go ahead and just do 68. And now it's nice and centered and nice padding. Someone's asking, what are you making today? So we are making the travel landing pages that I posted on Dribbble and Twitter and all the places a few weeks ago, I think, or maybe, I don't know what day it is. I don't know what time it is. I don't know anything anymore. But we're making this. All right. So let's go ahead and add some styling to this particular ellipse. Make it a little bit red with a little bit of pink in there. Maybe I'll bring out the saturation. This is a good talking point, right? At the moment, we have, I'm also going to add, actually, I'm going to turn off the border for now. We are going to add a border in a second, but I'm going to turn it off for now. But it's a good talking point. I like bringing up these tips. At the moment, the background behind this particular logo, and I think this probably will be the logo at some point, is dark. It's almost black. It's like a very dark blue. You have to keep in mind that even though we love very saturated colors, you'll often find that if you go for a very saturated color like this, it can be a little bit hard on the eyes. So things like pure reds or pure blues or pure greens, a lot of these different very saturated colors against a very dark background, it could be sometimes a little bit difficult to see. So in those cases, you might just want to grab that color picker and just move it over to the left a little bit, just to bring a little bit of that saturation out. It's still this really nice looking red, but it's not as harsh on the eyes as this one was, right? Something to keep in mind. Now, if you want to make sure it's really separated from the background, then you can add things like a border. You might want to add a nice white border like this. And then you can also put some sort of a logo in the middle. Let's make that border a little bit thicker. There we go. All right. So our navigation bar is looking okay, right? It's not looking great, but it's looking okay. I think it'll do for now. But a lot of you, where are you living? In the United States. I don't really give away my location, but I am in the United States somewhere. But we do have, we did have conferences all over the United States at some point in the past. Hopefully we'll get back to that. Adobe Max this year is online again, completely free. But maybe next year we'll get back to traveling and we'll travel around and who knows, maybe we'll meet one day. All right, so a lot of you are probably thinking, one of the benefits of the repeat grid is that we can dive into any of these cells. And if I change this to Comic Sans, for example, then in the repeat grid, it would change all of them, right? But of course we lose some of those other benefits. But that's the benefit of using our assets. So if I hop down here to the bottom, I can go to my document assets, or in this case, it's the libraries, and then the document assets will be the default location. You can also go back and see all of your different libraries right here. And I can add this as a character style just by pressing the plus button. I can also add the color as well. I mean, it's white, but you can definitely add that. And then if you did need to change, I can just dive in and just change this to navigation and link. And if you did need to change this, I can right click and press edit. You live in Nashville, Tennessee. If I do end up in Nashville for whatever reason, probably a conference, I'll definitely let all of you know on Twitter or Behance. All right, looks like a homepage for a sushi restaurant. Yeah, I mean, it could be. You can certainly do that. So I can dive in here and maybe change this to Aurea Ultra, which is another nice looking typeface. And I think it could work. It's a serif typeface, which are a little bit tricky. Most people these days go for sans serifs, but I kind of like the serif typefaces. All right, so we're going to stick with that. So definitely, inside of your document assets, if you need to, make those changes. Now, what I'm also noticing here, going back to being able to see things, is that it's a little bit muddy, right? If we take a look here, this isn't too bad, destinations. Packages, possibly. But even though this hot deals text layer is on a fairly dark background, there's a lot going on back there. There's this tree in the background, dark greens, grays, blacks, but it's busy, right? So it can be a little bit difficult to see certain text layers. So what you might want to do in that case is work with overlays. So I do have this image here, and what I might want to do is duplicate the image, or you can drag out an additional rectangle like this. Either one will work, and I'll just drag it maybe to the halfway point of this image. There's probably no right way to do this. And I'm going to turn off the border. I'm going to make sure that this rectangle, which I'm going to call overlay, is underneath the navigation. Now, obviously the rectangle is white at the moment, but what we want to do is add a little bit of an overlay. So there are two types of overlays you can probably get away with in a situation like this. Number one is you can make this the full height of that image, change the color to black, and then maybe drop the opacity a little bit, right? Now, of course, that darkens the entire image. So you have to ask yourself, is that what you want to do? In some cases, absolutely, you might want to do that. But in this case, what I think I might want to do is add a bit of a gradient. So in the color picker, I'm going to switch over to a linear gradient. And both colors are going to be set to a pure black, so this one at the bottom as well. But the one at the bottom, I'm actually going to drop the opacity all the way down to 0, right? And if you needed to, if you wanted to make sure that some of that image in the background comes through, you can also drop the opacity of the overall layer just a touch, right? And then you can experiment. I can bring this back up a little bit, maybe to the halfway mark, somewhere around there. That way we just have that gradient kind of touching the top of this landing page. And if I take a look, here's with that overlay on and then off. And you can certainly see the difference, right? We can now see, if I turn it back on, that text layer a lot better. So there's a lot more legibility there, which certainly helps with accessibility. Excuse me. On or off, and then on. And it's also going to help with any additional, I think I'm losing my voice already. I can't wait for this long weekend. It also helps with additional layers that might be on top of this image. So what we might want to do is maybe add the title of this particular landing page. So in this case, maybe I'll grab the text layer and type out something like discover. Oh no, I still have Comic Sans enabled. Should I just leave it at Comic? I should just do an entire masterclass of all Comic Sans. I think nobody would watch that, or by the end of it, there would be nobody left. Maybe just, you know, the mods because they have to be here. Or maybe Val would just cut my stream. She can probably do that. All right, so I'm gonna enlarge it a little bit. Let's go back to that Aurea Ultra, because I think it's kind of fun. But there's also the italic version of this particular typeface, right? And it just adds this fun vibe to this particular text layer. Does XD have transparency effects like multiply? Yes, so if you're talking about blend modes, absolutely. Right down here, we have all of our fun blend modes, darken, multiply, overlay, soft light, the whole 9 yards. Please don't do this to us, LOL, Comic Sans. I'm in, we'll see. I'll have to, Val, make a poll on if we should do all Comic Sans. Now that I know you can make polls, we're gonna make polls for everything. All right, so what I'm gonna do is let's make this a little bit larger. Let's try like 66. I don't know if that'd be too big. And then maybe right below it, we might want to really showcase that, you know, this is Japan. So Japan. Now, we might want to put some emphasis on this particular text layer. So I'm gonna drag it on up, make it really large. And maybe I'll just do some overlapping, just kind of like this, right? Just to give it a fun little feel. And I can hit the preview button at the top. Now this web page is definitely looking a little bit long. I might want to just drag it in a little bit. Even though, you know, we're working with a 16:9, sometimes I just like to see it, what it looks like when it's a little bit squishier. All right. That could work. That could work. Maybe I'll make this a little bit larger. Ooh, look at that. These are the things in design that just make, I almost got it. But these are the things that kind of make me happy. When, you know, text layers like this kind of line up really nicely. And I've been, have I revealed that yet? No, I haven't. So I'm working on a project and I'm working on the logo for this particular project. And I went through probably 200 typefaces because certain letters didn't line up properly and it was just bothering me. And I finally found one and it looks fantastic. I can't wait to show all of you that. There we go. That looks pretty good. So we've got discover and then Japan. And, you can also experiment with things like the letter spacing, kerning, that sort of thing, right? So maybe I might want discover. I might want it a little bit smaller, but I might want to space out the characters a little bit. Let's bring this down a touch. There we go. All right. How's our Comic Sans? No Comic Sans. Here's, vote in the poll. That's Adobe stock. Let's see. Just imagine a website that would sell the font Comic Sans. Would it use Comic Sans? Interesting question. How and when do you use a style guide, and do you use artboards for making dimensions for buttons and etc.? So, a lot of that comes down to your team. If you're working by yourself, sometimes a style guide can really help you keep organized, and especially if you have a style, right, you want to stick with, it can certainly help, or a group of assets or a group of character styles that you use very frequently. But if you're working with a team, either product managers, developers, designers, whatever it might be, you might want to have a style guide. They might want a style guide. In terms of creating components and things like that on artboards, you can also create them directly on the canvas. You can create them in a lot of different places. It's all up to you. I find it nice to create them on artboards just like this, so that I keep things organized and I can also see them in action. And then I can start adding things like I can select both of these, whoops, select those, and boop, pop them directly inside of those are not very good values, by the way. 157 points, probably not gonna happen. But all right, do you live in San Jose? I do not live in San Jose. Or maybe I do, I don't know. I might live in Kentucky. I probably don't, but you never know. But I'm not gonna reveal my location. All right, so we've got our header looking pretty good. And I'm going to make sure that this is nicely in place. And I do have that overlay in the background still, right? And if I needed to, I can always pull that down a touch just so that it really covers this text layer. But it's a very large text layer, so even without the low overlay, it's pretty visible. All right, now, what we're gonna do next, maybe I'll just for my sanity, bring that in. There we go. All right. Now, what we're going to do here is, on many travel-based web pages, you have this block that's sometimes in the middle, sometimes a little bit lower on. How do you pronounce boop? Boop, just like that. I'll get to a boop in a second. But you have this block at the bottom that allows users and visitors and travelers to automatically, book a flight, or at least start the process. Things like location, where are you going? How many guests are going to be with you? When are you arriving? That sort of thing. Make a style guide, file, and then import them as linked assets. You can certainly do that, and you can also use Creative Cloud libraries. I do know, without going into too much detail, there's a lot of updates coming to Creative Cloud libraries that will integrate with Adobe XD. We'll talk more about that at some point in the future. But, style guides and design systems are incredibly important, and we're going to do as much as we can to make sure that we continue fueling that fire. All right. So we're going to start creating that block. So I'm going to grab the good old rectangle tool, draw one out. And I'm not super concerned about the size of this particular block because we are going to be using padding, and we're going to be using potentially stacks as well. So that will allow us to adjust the elements inside of it, and the background layer, which is this one here, is going to automatically adjust. Now, we've got this block, right? This rectangle. And, against this darker background, looks pretty good. But against this lighter background, especially if we stuck with white, just not working, right? So in this case, we might want to explore a few things. One, we can add a border, very subtle border. That could work. But I'm a big fan of shadows. Now, some of you who watch this know exactly where I'm going with this. I love shadows, but I'm a stickler with shadows. Can we use red on the letter J in Japan? I mean, you could probably try that. I'm assuming it's going to look weird, but let's try. Then we'll get back to talking about shadows. Yeah, especially against that background, it's not working. It's an interesting idea though, and it's definitely a common thing you do in logo design. One letter might be a little bit different. Sometimes if it's different word, like initials, for example, that could work. But in this case, probably not going to work. All right, so I love shadows. I'm a stickler about shadows. If you're a new designer, pay attention. So I see a lot of people turning a shadow on. They'll either leave it like this, which isn't too bad, right? It's not bad. But I'll also see this. Bam. Don't do that. Don't do it. Now, the reason we use shadows typically, unless we're getting fancy with some other weird design, is we want to be able to separate the object we're applying the shadow to from the background. So in this case, we want to separate the white box from this light background. So a lot of newer designers figure, well, this dark shadow is definitely going to do the trick. And it will. It certainly will. But a lot of viewers will look at that and think, ugh, not working, right? So in this case, what we want to do is, use nice subtle shadows. What about a poll about drop shadows? Just make polls on everything. There you go. Val, oh boy, you may want to check out this poll. Oh boy. Okay, I'm going to copy the link. I'm not going to look at it. Let's see. So I think this is the, oh boy. Okay, let's look at this all together. Here we go. Thank you, Val. So I believe this is probably the one about Comic Sans. So 35% voted yes, 24% voted no, and 41% said make it stop. So I'm going to ignore the fact that if you combine make it stop and no, you get a much larger number than 35, but 35% of you, that's not bad. I'm going to keep this over here to keep an eye on it. 35%, I'm not going to do it. Maybe I will, I don't know. All right, back to the shadow. So what we're going to do, we're going to make it nice and subtle. So I'm going to, bump up down the Y value. Let's go for, I don't know, 58 maybe. It's a nice number. And then you'll definitely want to really increase that blur quite a bit. So let's try something like 48 maybe, 40, 48, yeah. And then 50, this should be 56 if we're following the 8-pixel grid. Don't really need to for shadows and things like that, but you can. And all of a sudden, it's looking a little bit better, right? Not great, but it's looking better. One other thing you can do, especially if you're working on a background that has a little bit of color, and this one, if you remember, we added a touch of blue in there. You might want to bring some of that blue into your shadow. So what I can do is I can hop into the shadow color picker, go to the blues, add a little bit of blue in here, right down there, and then experiment with the opacity, right? And just kind of tweak this. So if I go back a touch, there's without the color. Let's zoom in quite a bit, right? And there's with the color. So it still helps us separate this white box from this light blue-white background, but it also adds a nice touch of color. It's nice and subtle, and it doesn't burn our eyes, and it'll still work. Now, of course, if this is the main focal point, and this has to be legible, you might want to go something a little bit darker. But because we're going to have elements inside of this that will be the focal points, then we can get away with something like this. And it's not going to really dampen accessibility. Now, of course, if we were to select this box and this background, run it through an accessibility checker, it's going to fail. But because it's not a main focal point, we can probably get away with it. All right, so speaking of that, let's go ahead and let's add some information into this box. So we're going to start on the left-hand side, and we are going to start with location. So I'm going to grab the text tool, type out something like location, and we're going to change the color. Let's actually bring in this blue in the background and maybe darken it a touch. Ooh, look at that. Nice little bit of blue in there. And, this Aurea typeface is nice, but it's probably, even if I reset the spacing and make it smaller, it's probably not going to work. It's a little bit too bold, a little bit too stylistic. So we might want to go back to, if we're sticking with that serif family, we might want to go back to Museo and then maybe bump this up to about 700 so it's a little bit bolder. And let's try 18 possibly. Maybe. Might be a little bit small, but we're going to see. So we're going to have that there. And I'm thinking, to really help illustrate what each of these things are, we might want to bring in some icons. So my classmates love the subtle drop shadow that I learned from Howard's live streams. Yes. Thank you, Kara's classmates. All right, so we might want to bring in some icons. So if I go to my plugins panel at the bottom left-hand corner, I do have a bunch of plugins installed, including the Icons for Design plugin. And I can type out something like location, and I have a bunch of different location icons. Or if you have third-party icons in an icon manager like Nucleo. And by the way, Nucleo is a free application to manage your icons. And then I do have a bunch of paid icon sets in here, including Font Awesome 6, which is currently in beta, which is wonderful. So I might want to bring in, an icon like this one, which is great. And these are massive icons. They're all vector-based. And phew, bring it on down. And I'll probably want to make sure that I match these colors here if I am putting it beside, which I think looks kind of nice, right? That could work. One other thing we might want to do, we may not use it very much, but we may want to put these two elements, because they're beside each other, into a group and into a stack. So if I select both of them, I can type out something like header, and then, I don't know what you would call this, header location, maybe, I guess. Or I guess it would be location header. And then within the properties inspector, I can go ahead and turn a stack on. It's going to define it as horizontal. And then I can adjust the spacing if I need to, or I can dive in and swap them around. All right, for a slightly stronger effect, duplicate the layer, add another shadow, and make it slightly smaller. Yes, absolutely. So you can get super fancy with shadows. I'm actually working on something way over the top. It's just the most ridiculous thing in the world. I'm using a lot of shadows, but you're absolutely right. So what you can do is duplicate and then bring that shadow back in, right? Something like that. You can absolutely do that. I think for this box it looks okay with the single shadow, but yeah, it's a great tip, Alex. Now right below here, we may want to display where that location is. So I'm going to grab the text tool again, or you can duplicate a layer and Tokyo. And this one is going to be the focal point. So what I might want to do is darken this color a little bit. And you're noticing I'm sticking with that trend. I'm bringing back a little bit of blue into this particular text layer. And of course, you can do something like this, right? Where it's just dark gray. I would probably stay away from pure black. No particular reason other than, it's nice to add a bit of color. Now, if you are designing for OLED screens and you have like a background of an app, and black is perfect because it saves battery life. But adding a little bit of blue in there, a little bit of gray, it's kind of nice. All right, so what we're going to do here is I'm going to bump up the size a little bit, and I might want to bump up the weight as well. There we go. And I'll pop it right about there. Perfect. Now, maybe right beside location, so that users can choose a new location, we may want to maybe add a bit of an arrow pointing down so that they know they can click on that and something will pop up. We can use the glass effect here for this white block. You possibly can. The reason I'm not going to use that glass effect or a background blur at all is because once you start adding in background blurs, especially if there's a lot going on behind it, so behind this, there's that image and also this lighter background. If I were to add a background blur, even if I were to bump up the blur completely, bump up the brightness, we're still, right, if you take a look at without the background blur and with the background blur, it's a little bit difficult to read, right? And of course you can dive in and darken these colors and make sure it's just may not be worth it. Let's see, Tokyo, did I spell it wrong? Oh my gosh. Tokyo, there we go. All right, thank you. Do you know anything about time transitions for component? I know lots of things, but what I do know and what I can tell you is that time transitions for components are in development. I can't tell you what stage they're at, but it's something the team is actively working on, but it's a very large project and it could require, changes to the back end of XD. It could require a lot of different things. So it'll be released when it's released, or when it's ready, but definitely something that the team is working on and will be, did I spell it wrong again? No, I did not. Okay, you're messing with me. Okay, we're good. All right, going back to the arrow, I'm gonna make sure I'm inside of that header. I'm gonna activate my square grid command and control apostrophe, and just with my pen tool, boop, boop, and boop, there we go. I'll use this color here, which by the way, I should probably add to my colors, just in case I wanna change that later on. And position it somewhere over here. Maybe I'll increase this a little bit. Oh, that arrow's way too big. And that's definitely going back to what I talk about every single masterclass, definitely the benefit of pressing the preview button at the top and taking a quick look. You can also design with that preview window open. So I can make changes to that arrow, right? While I'm designing. I can round it out if I want to, but I like the square corners or square edges in this case. So we're gonna stick with that. All right, so that is looking pretty good. Now what we're gonna do is we are going to grab both of these elements here. I might wanna just like that. And I'm gonna pop this into a group. Call this location. There we go. And we might want to start exploring padding and stacks before we dive too deep into this. So we do have this box in the background, this container, right? I'm gonna bring this in. And what I want to do in this case, perfect, is make sure that this location group is inside of who can design a boop animation. Boop. There we go. All right, so we want to make sure that this is inside of a larger group with this container in the background. So I'm going to make sure to select both of these. I'm going to pop them into a group, Command and Control G, and I'll call this, let's say, booking. And with that done, inside of the properties inspector, like we've done several times, I'm going to turn a stack on, which is automatically going to define the padding as well. If you don't need a stack, then you can turn padding on only if you want. You can turn padding only on. English is hard. All right, so it's going to define as horizontal, and of course you can dive in. Let's say we wanted maybe to squish it in a little bit, 40 and possibly 40. And on the sides, I mean, it's not too bad, 62. I'll just make this even at 62 as well. So now if I dive in here and duplicate this group, it's going to automatically resize that background, right? And I can space these out quite a bit. Let's try 56. And then I can dive in and make changes. So maybe this one will be how many guests? So 2 adults. Spelling is hard too. And this will be guests. And watch what happens when I do this. Guests. So not only did the arrow, which is inside of a stack with these other elements, not only did that come on over and resize, but the background resized as well, which is wonderful. All right, so now we might want another icon. Let's say users, for example. That looks pretty fancy right there. That looks pretty good. Now, watch when I paste it, everything explodes because these icons are incredibly large. So stacks and padding doing exactly what it should be doing, right? But I'm gonna bring this on in, and you're seeing the wonderfulness. That moved away somewhere. Oh, okay, I know what I did. Because it's anchored to the left, so there we go. Bring that down. And depending on the type of icons you're using, one other thing you can do, let me actually just set this color, then I'll talk about that in a second. There we go. It's a little bit high. There we go. Okay, so one other thing you can do if you don't want to deal with that mess is, let's go ahead and name this guests. I'm going to duplicate this over. So we have another one looking pretty good, is instead of these simple icons, is we can dive in here and use a square, right? Delete. We'll have a little bit of a border. Perfect. So depending on the type of icons, you can actually copy an icon and then paste the appearance. Now, in this case, it's not going to work because these icons, I don't believe, can do that, right? But if it's an image-based icon, you can paste that image into the square. That way you're not worrying about resizing and things like that. And I believe in some applications, you can actually copy different, can I do this from here? Can I change copy icon, copy SVG? No, I can't copy like an image of it, which wouldn't make sense anyway, because we want that vector image, right? But you can do that in some cases. All right, not vector image, vector icon. All right, so next one would be arriving. And for this, we might want to explore maybe a plane. There's a lot of fun planes here. This one looks okay. Simple, it'll do. If anyone from Nucleo is watching, which I can't imagine anyone is, but I would love the ability when I copy, if it copied a much smaller version of the icon. Like this one is 640 pixels. It's a large icon, right? In some cases might be good, but in some cases not so much. Bring that down, swap it around, delete this. Let me just make sure it's the right size first. And this is where things like guides and other goodies come into play. Boop. There we go. And what day is it? May 28th. And then 2021. And I'm going to select the T and H and make sure we have superscript. Beautiful. The next one is maybe departing. When are you leaving this location? So this one, we don't have to do much. We're going to duplicate it. Again, that background resizes really nicely. And departing. And maybe we're going to go to June, I don't know, 7th possibly. There we go. And then for the plane, you can dive in and make changes to, if these are separate layers, you can certainly rotate it a little bit, right? So the plane is like that. These are not separate layers, so it'll be a little bit more difficult. You can of course adjust these, but we're gonna leave it at that for now, because I do wanna move on to some other things. And then finally, now that we've completed this, maybe over to the right-hand side, we may want a button. So once a user has gone through and changed all of this, they can press a button and they can start their booking process. So still inside of this group, I'm gonna name this departing. And then this one was arriving. There we go. And then I'm gonna grab the rectangle and drag one out like that. Now we do have this red up here, right? Which I did not, because I'm a terrible designer. I did not add this as color inside of my document assets. Now I have it. And we can name this maybe highlight red or something. And if I dive in here, select this object, click on it, and now we have our nice red. And then inside of this, now, another thing to take a note of. Nucleo had a departing, it did, but I don't want to deal with resizing and things like that. We're already running out of time. But I would, in my other, actually it should be the opposite. No, it should be okay. In my other example, I did have that plane in there. All right, so here, what we want to do, let me just change this to 56. So we have a button. And what we typically do is we'd grab a text layer with the T key, that's the one, and we would click, right? Hey, what's going on, right? What is happening? Something to take a note of, right? Because we're inside of a stack, and every time we create an object, it puts it on the parent level of that stack, and it moves objects around as it's supposed to do. So it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. If you wanted if you're in a situation where you want an object on top of another object, what you want to do is grab that object, which I have this red box here, this red rectangle, place it into a group, Command and Control G. I'm going to call this button. Same works with a component as well. And then make sure you're inside of that button and then repeat the process. So grab the text tool, click, and type, right? So now XD is going to look at this as one object because it's inside of a group, a component, a mask, a Boolean object, whatever it might be. Yes, Gal got it exactly right because you're inside of a stack. Thank you, Ali. I appreciate that. All right. So let's go ahead and change this to white. Now, is it okay to call it a CTA button if you need to press on something like submit? Absolutely. In many cases, this is called a call to action because this is something you want people to click on. It's good to note that, Gal brings up submit, right? It's something you might want to think about as well, not just by yourself, but also your designers and your developers and your UX people and designers and everybody, right? Is let's go, is that phrase, does it make sense? People who are landing on this page, are they going to know that when they go through this process here, are they going to know that the word let's go will take them to the booking experience? Maybe. And a lot of it will depend on everything that comes before it. So if this all makes sense, if they've used the travel website before, then they might figure it out, right? Otherwise, you might have to do something like submit or book or let's travel or something like that, right? And if I wanted to change that, I'm going to make sure that I have the button selected. I'm going to turn, I don't need a stack in this case. I'm just going to simply turn padding on. And now I can change this to, let's say, let's travel. And it's going to resize it, right? Perfect. Oops. Now, looking at this box, it's looking okay. It's not looking too bad, but I do think that it's a little bit squishy, and I may want, even though I have some nice padding in between each of these items, I may want an additional separator, a very subtle separator. So inside of here, if I dive into this stack again, I can grab my line tool, for example, or the rectangle, and draw one out. Maybe I'll change this to a light gray. Maybe I'll add a little bit of blue in there like we've been doing. I want it a little bit lighter than these other elements, because if you do have it the same color, it's gonna look, it's not too bad though, but you know, I just want it a little bit lighter. So it's there, but it's also not there, right? Then I can duplicate this and just pop it into place. And you're noticing everything moves really nicely. Boop. And then, do we need one there? Maybe, possibly. Maybe, possibly not. I don't know, we'll see. All right, and then of course I can make sure that, let's say 56, make sure everything is spaced out really nicely, and all of a sudden, things are breathing, right? I talk about breathing a lot. Not only because us as humans need to breathe, maybe one day we won't have to, but not because we're dead, that sounded weird, but technology, never mind. All right, but because, you know, if you have your objects squished too far together, it's very claustrophobic. It just gives a weird experience. Let things breathe, especially if you're designing landing pages and long form pages. Don't feel the need to squish everything on top of each other. People are going to scroll if you make the top section enticing enough. So that looks pretty good, and I'm pretty happy with it. All right, now down at the bottom, we may want to kick things off and maybe start adding in some additional information to get those users scrolling, right? So maybe we'll start off with a header. Something like popular destinations, and we'll apply our nice blue. Now, maybe, or maybe not, right? Over here, this blue-gray looks okay. Down here, because the background is a little bit more blue than this box here, it starts to blend in a little bit. So in this case, I might just want to darken it a touch. Not too much, right? I mean, it depends on your style, but this is a little bit too drastic. Not bad, a little bit drastic. So we're gonna go with popular destinations, and we can either stick with Museo or go back to Aurora. That looks pretty good. Make sure it's centered. You can also click these buttons at the top. But we are running out of time. All right. And then we might want to display a few destinations right down here. Have a nice box. Maybe we'll round to the corners just a touch. That's a bit too much. Let's try 8. Whoops, what did I do? And then on the inside, I'm going to duplicate this shape. We're going to have a little area for images. Now, what you're going to notice, let me bring this in a little bit, you can also use padding in this situation too, is when you are using rounded corners, two objects that are very similar to each other, it looks a little bit off, doesn't it? Right? Even though they're the exact same value. So just grab this one and bring it back just a touch. Sometimes if you have it, it'll look pretty good, or reduce it by another 8 pixels, possibly. Maybe, yeah, right about there. That looks okay. So we have this one, and this is a perfect opportunity for a repeat grid. So if I go ahead and repeat grid at the top, boop, whoa, where did I go? My scroll wheel just went crazy. And I can drag out, let's say 2 more. And I can hop over to Finder, grab some images. Let's grab, I don't know, which images look good? They all look good, right? 1 and 2 and I don't know, 3. And boop, pop them all in. There we go. I can double click if I need to resize them, but that looks pretty good. And then maybe in the background, I may just want, whoops, my ellipse, may just want like a nice decoration back there. Something like this. We can pull in that red that we're using just to add something in the background. And if you find that this is too distracting, then you can always, adjust the color a little bit. But it's not bad. I think it could work. All right. I can group these, group. Call this destinations or popular. And that is going to just about wrap it up. And of course, if you wanted to, modify it for the other images, we can always grab one. What was that? This one I liked as well. Just pop this into place, and now you have a new one. Now, we have this overlay, right? In this case, you might just want to hide the overlay because you may not need it. Or maybe you want to change the text colors at the top here to modify it for this background. But I like this one here. Looks pretty good. And that's going to wrap things up for today. So big thank you to everyone who has tuned in live, Gal and Cornell and Henry and Basmala. I will get that right. I apologize. And Disenagdor, I'm sorry, Val, everyone else, big thank you for tuning in. I'll be back next week with another masterclass. We're going to go over mobile design next week. Not for this, but something completely different. It's going to be a lot of fun. Stick around. Kyle T. Webster's coming up in just a few minutes, and I will see you all next time.